Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of our Digital Dialogues series. I'm joined by Mike Blake from Palladium. Mike, how are you, first of all?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, Rory.
Perfect. Well, to get us started then, I'll start with a question that we ask everyone, and it's a nice, easy one. What are your greatest frustrations with the industry at the moment?
Well, let me think which is the greatest frustration. I think truly right now we're struggling with our supply chain. The supply chain ripples down and has a big impact on our customers. The supply chain has lengthened out substantially. In some cases, we were able to get product, maybe some of our AV equipment within 1 or 2 days overnight. Right now, we're looking at worst case 18 weeks for that equipment. And we have an office over in Wuhan. I guess until last year, nobody knew where Wuhan, China was. But Wuhan last week went to another lockdown because they discovered some COVID cases. Then 2 days ago, the Chinese closed one of the major shipping ports. Now, a lot of the things that we supply eventually are products that are either made or partially made in China. Whether it's the Cisco equipment, the Crestron, the cybersecurity equipment. So it ripples down and affects us where we cannot support our customers in the rapid time frame that we have been in the past. Our customers' expectations are still, in some regards, in the past because we set a standard.
Sure, and I assume that you're referring to Superyacht clients being renowned for their patience, I suppose. Typically, they are quite forgiving, I understand it, when it comes to the long provision of systems and spare parts. So what impact has this had on the reality of the Superyacht scenario? Because as jokes aside, as we well know, people, this is a sort of rapid response industry. People don't tend to take too well to being asked to wait.
Well, that's exactly correct. I mean, there are maybe two different sides to our customers or two different customer types. One is the customer who is fairly isolated from his businesses. So he or she does not truly understand the impact that we're seeing in our supply chain, which is universal, not necessarily in the marine industry, but throughout the entire world, supplying of electric circuit breakers to toys. I saw last night that they are recommending that people start purchasing for Christmas now rather than waiting because the supply chain is almost getting exhausted. So those customers who are not in touch with the reality of what is going on still have these expectations and demands that are almost impossible to fulfill. Then we have the other customer who is quite aware of the supply chain issues that are affecting their own businesses. And they're a little bit more forgiving. They understand that if they can't get the product for their own businesses, we cannot get the product to service them. But this ripples down, Royal. The last year or so, our customers have used their yachts a lot more than they have in the past.
Is that a fact? Because we've heard anecdotal evidence and we've seen various figures and stuff. From your experience, the customers that you do have and the clients you service, have you found that the majority of them are using the yachts more than they have done previously?
Yes, definitively. Our customers definitely have used them much more. And from two different aspects. One is it's been a safe haven from the COVID. And that's what they looked at it for them and their families. The other is just to get away from this lockdown, to get to a place where they can actually relax and enjoy their time. So they're using the yachts a lot more, which reduces the amount of time that we have for service. And when it does come available for service, then we have a shorter time frame to do the service in.
Sure. What impact has this had on your clients during this current season? Because obviously you've spoken already about the lengthening of the supply timeline and the difficulty of getting certain systems, and also the differing perspectives of the owners depending on how intrinsically involved they are in their businesses. So what have been the reactions to clients this year? Have they had to go without certain systems? Have they had to find ways around things? How have you dealt with this time frame and supply chain issue?
A number of the things that you mentioned. One is they're going to just have to go forward without
Hmm.
getting that part of the vessel updated. In other cases, we're using creative methods to try to keep the systems alive.
Hmm.
And that's everything from purchasing used product off of eBay for a temporary measure, which is
Hmm.
not the ideal approach for the super yachts, but it's just to try to keep the systems operating. And then put in the long-term purchasing for the spare parts and for these projects, and be able to do a much better planning for the refit timeframes.
Hmm.
We're
Oh,
trying to impress that on our customers.
sure. And what have you found to be the most difficult systems during this period? Is there a particular element of the setup which has required more maintenance than others? You mentioned updates. Is that for the whole system, or are there particular elements that, in terms of advising other clients, in terms of getting ahead of the game, what are the sort of key areas?
I think anything that is associated with the user interface, creature comforts, and the AV
Hmm.
system is definitely one of those. The other side is the security side, and security both from a security system to the cybersecurity. And most people don't want to talk about the cybersecurity. We're under very large, strong NDAs, but the
Hmm.
cybersecurity has grown substantially in the amount of equipment and systems to be able to protect the yacht, the owner, his personal data has
Hmm.
multiplied by a factor here, a couple factors within the last year and a half. And I think the cybersecurity side is not talked about enough because, again, we can't expose the problems that we're seeing. But it
Okay.
is, I think, in the real world, we're seeing the hacks occurring in the United States to some very large corporations, to the oil pipeline. I think you might have seen
Hmm.
that. Well, the same thing occurs in the yachting industry, and to be able to provide that level of security is a big challenge right now.
You mentioned the sort of inability to talk about it. I can understand that as an owner, you wouldn't want your own sort of liabilities or cyber weaknesses being flashed across the media, because that's opening the door and providing an invitation to hackers or criminals or whatever it may be. But are you able to give a sense of what are the most prevalent threats, what you're seeing time and time again, and what people should be aware of, and be investing in protecting themselves again?
I think probably the most prevalent is the physical threat, where a vendor comes on board with a flash drive, plugs it
Hmm.
into maintenance on a piece of equipment, and all of a sudden that has a virus that starts to multiply within the systems itself. A crew member coming on board, an owner coming on board with an iPad that might have a virus on it. So those are
Hmm.
the type of things. We can do a pretty good job of protecting from the firewall standpoint with the AI systems that are employed, because they're continually updating and fighting those attacks that are coming through the satellite links, let's say, or the cellular links. But it's the physical, where somebody comes on board with a piece of equipment, and now all of a sudden we have that challenge where something has infiltrated the system.
Sure. But these sound like they're more sort of attacks that have come across by chance. It's something else that's been brought on board that someone may not realize. Are they targeted attacks, or are they more just sort of phishing, in the sense of just seeing what they can get and where they get?
I think the majority are just
Hmm.
phishing techniques that are used, but we do have some very targeted attacks.
Okay. So, and what would be your advice to any owner who hasn't yet taken steps to protect against these types of threats?
Take this very, very seriously, more seriously than your physical protection of bodyguards that you have around you.
Sure. Okay, moving on then. We discussed briefly before, but obviously Palladium are known for doing some pretty weird and wonderful things with technology. What can we expect next in terms of what's going to be on board super yachts?
Well, we have one owner who has been driving us pretty hard on some new advances in technology. Now we're continuing our development on mixed reality, which is the presentation of a combination of augmented reality and virtual reality. And I believe that will continue to develop quite strongly, both from a user presentation standpoint and also from a support standpoint for the engineers and the support of the vessel.
Hmm.
The other aspect that I've been working on probably for about 5 years, but more recently being driven by a customer, is the holograms and the hologram
Okay.
presentation. The customer definitely would like to have a more 3D presentation, real time, connected back to shore-based systems, such as an example where rather than transporting a entertainment group, a band, to his yacht, he would like to be able to have it instantaneously come up as a hologram and
Hmm.
for everybody to enjoy. You know, in the past, we're restricted to, you know, large televisions, which are in a 2D format, where nobody wants to put on glasses to look at a 3D. That's just kind of not convenient. But the
Hmm.
hologram truly brings us into the 3D world that we normally interface with everybody in a 3D fashion. Except for this Zoom call that we're having today, your colleagues in the office, you're in a 3D fashion, and that's
Hmm.
natural for humans. So we're working with other companies in the development of this hologram presentation, and specifically for use on yachts.
And how will this work in reality? Would the bands get feedback as well? If you imagine seeing a live band play at a concert or at an event or whatever it may be, I imagine they feed somewhat off the energy of the crowd and the sounds of the people they're with. Obviously, the people on the yacht will be able to see the band, but will the bands get any sort of sensory feedback from the yacht, and how will it all be presented on board? In an ideal world, obviously it's still in development.
In an ideal world, it's a two-way interaction. So the band would actually see the crowd,
Hmm.
the guests that are on board the yacht, so they'd be able to react to the body language, the screams and cheers, and the excitement and the clapping. And that's the ideal world, and that's the end
Hmm.
goal that we're working towards. Initially, in our prototyping, we're working on a one-way viewing, so the owner can actually see this in a 3D fashion. Um, it can expand it to a very large size, so it can envelop the entire salon or aft deck, as an example, which would be kind of exciting.
So you can have a 9 foot tall Beyonce, basically.
That is correct. Yeah, that'd be kind of exciting.
Yeah, exactly. Um, what about the motivations behind this technology? Because it's something we spoke about briefly before, but obviously one of the good things about having a live band on board or a particular artist is the sort of exclusivity. And whilst obviously having hologram technology is more exclusive than being able to get a band, there's lots of things about having the person there and on board. What are the motivations for this particular owner to go towards holographic technology rather than simply flying in the person?
Well, I think for this owner very specifically, it's two motivations. One, it can be done very quickly.
Hmm.
So we can basically set up the structure for the band as a remote. Obviously, we have cameras and devices that they have to put in place where they're playing, but we can do that quite quickly. We don't have the logistics of bringing the band members onto the boat. We also don't have the security concerns of the band coming on board along with their setup engineers. And
Hmm.
the owner is not exposed in today's world to another virus that
Sure.
could be on board. And I think those are long-term goals once we get this established. Um, I think the more instantaneous to be able to pick a band, you know, send the equipment, fly our engineers there, and then set it
Hmm.
up so that they can have it in tomorrow evening, as an example.
Sure. And I suppose that doesn't mean they purely have to use holograms, does it? I mean, if they're in a position where there's a particular band they want to see, or they're in a convenient location, they can still have them on board. It's just providing more choice and flexibility, I suppose.
Well, that's correct. It's not an either or. It's a both.
Sure. And what about in terms of other technologies on board? We've talked about cyber and we've talked about holograms. Is there anything else that's sort of upcoming that you think is particularly of note, or that you could see becoming sort of ubiquitous in the not so distant future?
Well, on the not too sexy side, shall we say, we look at the AV systems and the holograms as pretty sexy.
Hmm.
We've been working for a number of years on our Titan system, which is a complete real-time driven electrical distribution system where every single component or circuit in the vessel is monitored and controlled and is also supplemented with AI. That we're continuing our development. We had a bit of a pause last year with the COVID, but we are
Hmm.
back very heavily in the development of that and expect to roll it out on a very, very large yacht.
Sure. And what are the benefits of having this sort of wholesale monitoring on board? Um, what what will it help the owner with? Will it save costs in the long run? Will it just help with the operations of the vessel? What are the benefits of this system?
Well, there are a number of benefits associated. I think it's probably one of the first systems I've designed that actually has a cost justification to it, rather than an emotional buy. But
Yeah.
yeah, we can save a substantial amount of cabling, a
Hmm.
substantial amount of weight, and a substantial amount of labor in the installation. So those basically pay for the system and provide a cost justification back. The benefit really that I'm driving towards is to have the engineer's capability to be able to troubleshoot any circuit on the boat real time in a 3D fashion and to have complete control over every single circuit breaker on the vessel. So in the
Hmm.
past, when let's use an example. Let's say an American comes on board a European boat, and what's the first thing that they tend to do? They plug in a 120 volt appliance, so let's say a
Hmm.
hair dryer or something, into a 220 volt circuit. And what happens? The circuit pops. So we now have the engineer searching down, trying to find where that circuit breaker is hidden behind some panel, someplace on the vessel. Well, that doesn't have to occur in our approach with the Titan system because those panels can be completely hidden away. And he just pulls up his iPad and says, oh, I know where the location, and I can see that that tripped in a 3D fashion, and I can reset it right from here. So we end up with less time of the engineer. We have greater service levels for the guest who has been on board. So the resetting of that circuit, we also monitor all the current and voltages and along with the amperages that are being consumed so we can better manage the power
Hmm.
loads. So I think all those come together and become a system that is easy to bring in the door because of cost justification, but then the real icing is the convenience for the engineering team.
You mentioned the convenience for the engineering team. Something that we've heard about in the past when it comes to technological systems on board is that sometimes, I'm certainly not saying all the time, but sometimes the crew struggle with the complexity of systems. Even if it's AVIT, they struggle to make the most of the systems and correctly explain to the guests or the owner, whoever it may be, how to get the most out of them. Something like this Titan system that you explain, which has such widespread control of the whole vessel, how usable will it be for chief engineer or the ETO or whoever it may be? Is it designed to be incredibly user friendly from their perspective? Because that's a lot of control and a lot of systems, and I imagine it's a lot of complexity that you're going to have to try and make seem very simple.
Well, it is. Well, first of all, I should say I think it's very simple in its design format, and we designed it in a 3D presentation. So effectively they can start at the top and tier down, and then each panel that they get to, it'll direct them to the panel that is faulting. It shows actually in a 3D format, the panel and the breakers, and you can switch them. You can actually touch a breaker and move it back and forth. So it's quite simple to use. And I wanted to make it as simplistic as possible from a user standpoint, because we know that crew do change on a fairly rapid basis. But
Mhm.
it should be anybody should be able to pick it up and within, I think, 4 to 5 minutes be able to use the system. And that's my
Sure.
goal.
Looking even further in the future, then, what is the sort of end goal for Superyacht technology? Is it, you mentioned the Titan system, which is bringing all the systems together and making it simple to manage. what would be your end goal moving towards the future? Is it technology moving towards the point where it will require less crew on board, or is technology becoming more complicated so you need specific types of crew on board? What tasks and roles do you see technology playing in the future? I mean, I know it's a very hard thing to predict, but you're better placed than most people to try and predict it. So I thought I'd give you that question.
Well, I may offend quite a few people if you really ask me what my vision is for the future. My vision for the future is that we drive these features, shall we say, and conveniences much more through the use of AI. AI is much more intelligent than you and I are, because from a standpoint that we're not good at repetitive tasks. We are not, and we tend to fall short on working 24 hours a day. So AI has that convenience, and the convenience that it is a self-learning. We are self-learning as humans, but if you combine a lot of these technologies together, for an example, why should we be having crew members that have to remember the conveniences, or the not conveniences, but the likes and dislikes of certain guests when they come on board? It should be a self-learning system. So when you come on board the yacht, my system should learn your likes and dislikes and continually evolve itself to provide the type of content that you want, the type of interaction that you enjoy during the specific times of the day. That becomes a very sophisticated and very beneficial system. Now we start to move some of those crew into the background. I truly do believe that robotics is going to play a very large role in the interfacing to the guests and owners. The vet consistency at 2:30 in the morning when they want a ham sandwich, well, that robotics can actually produce that and deliver it without ever having to wake up the crew. And yeah, is that science fiction? Sure it is. Will it come? Yes, because we're starting to see that level of robotics being used in the senior healthcare industry today. And why can't we employ that on our yachts?
Sure. Perfect. Well, Mike, I think that's just about everything we've got time for. I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me, and hopefully we'll be able to share a drink soon in 3D rather than in 2D, as you said earlier.
Look forward to it, Roy.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.